The ink from Berlin was barely dry when Europe's soldiers and administrators marched into Africa to make the paper real. On the map, Nigeria had been assigned to Britain. But on the ground, it was not a single nation. It was a land of kingdoms and caliphates, of bustling trade cities and farming villages, of empires with histories stretching back centuries. To the north stood the Sokoto Caliphate, an Islamic empire of scholarship and law, founded in the early 1800s by Usman Dan Fodio. Its emirates, Kano, Zaria, Katsina, were thriving centers of commerce, linking trans-Saharan trade routes to the world. To the west, the Yoruba kingdoms, Ife, Oyo, Ijebu, rose with their proud traditions of kingship and artistry. Bronze heads from Ife still shone like mirrors of genius. Drums beat in palace courtyards, and the Oyo cavalry once thundered across the savannah like storms. Further east, the Igbo heartlands thrived with village republics, decentralized, democratic, bound together by councils and elders. Every man and woman had a voice in the square. No throne towered over them, yet their society was rich with trade, spirituality, and innovation. Three great worlds, side by side. Distinct. Independent. Alive. And then came Britain. Britain did not begin with armies. They began with merchants. The Royal Niger Company, led by Sir George Goldie, crept into the rivers with trading posts, treaties, and guns. Chiefs signed documents they could not read, thinking they were agreeing to trade. In truth, they were signing away sovereignty. By the late 1800s, the company controlled much of the Niger River. Trade became monopoly. Resistance was met with gunboats. Villages that refused to sell palm oil or rubber at British prices were shelled into silence. But the company's rule was only the beginning. In 1900, Britain officially took over. Nigeria became not just a zone of commerce, but a colony. The Sokoto Caliphate resisted. Proud emirs, guardians of centuries of Islamic law, would not bow easily. But Britain came with Maxim guns, the first machine guns, spitting hundreds of bullets a minute. In 1903, British troops stormed Kano, shattering its defenses. The emir fled, and Sokoto soon fell. The once mighty caliphate was broken, its emirs reduced to indirect rulers under British protection. The sword of Usman Dan Fodio, symbol of Islamic unity, was handed to the British as a trophy. A kingdom of books, law, and faith was humbled. But in the south, resistance took another form. The Igbo, with no kings to capture, became a nightmare for colonial officials. Every village was a fortress of stubborn independence. Britain's solution was brutal. They burned villages, imposed taxes, and appointed warrant chiefs, men with no legitimacy, who became instruments of oppression. The Yoruba resisted too. The Ijebu fought hard, their warriors fierce. But in 1892, British forces with Maxim guns crushed them. The gates of their sacred city were blasted open. Oyo, already weakened, fell deeper into colonial orbit. Britain conquered not just a people, but different nations, distinct tribes, diverse tongues, unique practices, various beliefs and contrasting ideologies, and now sought to fuse them into one. By 1914, Britain made its boldest move. It merged the northern and southern protectorates, along with Lagos, into one entity, called it Nigeria. It was not a marriage of choice. It was a forced union. North and south, Muslim and Christian, emirs and chiefs, caliphates and villages, tied together by lines drawn far away. To Britain, this was efficiency. But to Africans, it was confusion. How could nations with different languages, histories, and systems suddenly become one? The answer: they didn't. They lived uneasily under one colonial roof. Britain governed with divide and rule. In the north, they ruled through emirs, preserving Islamic structures. In the south, they used warrant chiefs and direct control. Suspicion grew between regions, not unity. The seeds of future conflict were sown. Taxes were imposed on people who never knew such burdens. Farmers were forced to abandon food crops for cash crops, cocoa, groundnuts, palm oil, feeding Britain's factories while villages sometimes went hungry. Railways cut through the land, not to connect Nigerians, but to connect mines and plantations to ports. Education was limited, designed to produce clerks and interpreters, not leaders. And those who resisted, resisted with fire. In 1929, Igbo women rose up in what became known as the ABA Women's War. Thousands marched against unfair taxes, shaking the colonial system with their defiance. British bullets answered their cries, but the spirit of resistance lived on. Nigeria was no longer a collection of kingdoms. It was now a colony. But beneath the surface, the old pride, the old strength, remained. And Nigeria was only one story. Across Africa, the lines drawn in Berlin were being made real with blood and conquest. In Cameroon, Germany planted its flag, imposing harsh rule until World War I tore it from their grip. France and Britain swooped in, slicing the land between them like hunters dividing a carcass. Families were split, cultures fractured, borders rewritten overnight. And so, the great carving of Africa moved on, colony by colony, empire by empire. Nigeria had been bound together with chains of ink and iron. Cameroon had been sliced apart like cloth on a tailor's table. And yet, the scramble was far from over. For in the south, another land was waiting. Rich in gold, diamonds, and endless plains, it would become the crown jewel of Europe's greed, and the graveyard of African freedom.